I wasn't planning to introduce Stephanie this afternoon. I was going to ask somebody else to do that, but I'd like to begin by thanking her very much for coming along and speaking to us. Could you give her a round of applause, please? Thank you. How much do we love her? Thank you. You know who she is. You don't need me to tell you who she is. I can go through the various appointments. I suppose I will mention one thing, which is that she's the visiting Harcourt Professor at the University of Adelaide, and what a great pleasure it is to be able to say that with Jeff, who's taken the trouble to come and sit through this entire conference with us. What an honour it is to have him here. I suppose there are 3 or 4 economists that have been an inspiration to me down the years, and Geoffrey is definitely one of them, and Stephanie is definitely another one. And I just want to tell you one story about Stephanie this week, because I've been following around a bit, and she got here, it seems like ages ago in some ways now, last Sunday. Straight off the plane, I thought, you'll just want to sleep, surely. No, we're off up to Cleland. We got there too late, I'm afraid, to cuddle a koala, but she got to pat a koala. Those of you who are Facebook friends of me, you will see a photograph at some stage of Stephanie patting a koala. I haven't got round to... I'm not very good at photographs, I'm afraid, but you'll get some kind of photo. There might be an odd bit of koala missing, or a bit of Stephanie missing, perhaps, but you'll get something. Yeah, what did I want to talk about? She's done so many things already, and I'm going to be following her around, which is a great pleasure. I mean, to follow somebody that you admire as much as I admire her around to meetings, and to get to chat to her about a variety of things is a dream come true, as far as I'm concerned. I just wanted to tell you one story. We had a long day the other day. I've forgotten what day of the week it is. It's a long time since I really had any sleep to speak of. We had a long day the other day. We did all sorts of things. She was doing interviews for newspapers. You might have seen 1 or 2 of them, and radio interviews and the like. And Gabby and I were sitting in my office planning this conference, and you'll have a chance to thank Gabby again at the end. Stephanie popped her head in and said, "Are you still working then?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I'm off back to the hotel now." So I thought, "Oh, that's great. She'll go back to the hotel and have a bit of rest," because no one can work that hard for so long without resting. It's just not possible. In that respect, from what I hear of Bernie Sanders, she's a female Bernie Sanders. I mean, they're well matched to each other. Later on, I find out she's walked on her way back to her hotel, and she's happened to bump into some of the students. So I missed out this bit we'd done during the day. Sorry, we had a conversation in front of students on the Bachelor of Economics Advanced degree at Adelaide Uni. She bumps into some of the students on the way back. He must be exhausted. She buys them 4 jugs of beer, and she spends the night chatting to them. Well, it's that kind of I'm not accusing her of loving her beer, but it's that kind of economist that I'd like you to welcome, and it's a great privilege, a great pleasure to ask you again to welcome a dear friend as well as a mentor of mine, Professor Stephanie Kelton, to talk to us this afternoon.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you. I'm going to sit, if that's okay, just for a minute. And then I'm going to get energized. I'm going to bounce around like a kangaroo. I just want to say this is the end of a 3-day conference, as you know, and you're incredible. To look out and see this many people still here at the end of the 3rd day, that does not normally happen. At least I'm used to attending economics conferences, and that does not happen. So kudos to you for coming. I am sure that this is a reflection of how rewarding the experience has been. Thank you again to Stephen, to Gabby, to Phil, and all the other organizers, because pulling off a conference like this is not an easy thing. There's so much work that goes in behind the scenes. And so thank you to all of you who pitched in and did anything at all, however big or small, to help make this a successful event. I thought that we would kick this off, since I'm going to talk a little bit about the Green New Deal, and questions kept coming up, what is the Green New Deal? What is, and I kept saying, well, it depends who you ask, right? Well, this video, I think, perfectly captures the essence of the vision of the Green New Deal as it's been put forward by perhaps the most identifiable figure in the US context. And I know you've heard about her because Andres, where are you? Andres. There he is, all the way in the back. Andres talked about Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Can I call her AOC? Yes. Thank you. That helps. AOC put together with Naomi Klein, who's also involved with this piece, a beautiful artist who does incredible illustrations, and Naomi Klein's partner. You know Naomi's most recent book is called On Fire, right? So Naomi's partner wrote the script. And this is a little video that asks us to imagine the world as it could be. Okay? So I want to do this first and then jump in and I'll do the little Kelton bit that's going to follow. Okay? All right. Can we play the video?
The bullet train from New York to DC. It always brings me back to when I first started making this commute. In 2019, I was a freshman in the most diverse Congress in history. Up to that point, it was a critical time. I'll never forget the children in our community. They were so inspired to see this new class of politicians who reflected them, navigating the halls of power. It's often said, you can't be what you can't see. And for the first time, they saw themselves. I think there was something similar with the Green New Deal. We knew that we needed to save the planet and that we had all the technology to do it, but people were scared. They said it was too big, too fast, not practical. I think that's because they just couldn't picture it yet. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with how we got here. 1977, New York. A senior scientist named James Black made a presentation about how burning fossil fuels could eventually lead to global temperatures rising 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Within 2 years, one of the world's biggest supertankers was outfitted with a state-of-the-art lab to measure CO2 in the ocean, gathering more data about global warming. Guess who was doing all of this research? ExxonMobil, the oil and gas company. Oh yeah, Exxon knew this whole time, as did our politicians. 10 years later, James Hansen, NASA's top climate scientist, told Congress he was 99% certain that global warming was happening and caused by humans. That was 1988, the year before I was even born. So did Exxon listen to the science, including their own? Did they change business models, invest in renewables? No, the opposite. They knew and they doubled down. They and others spent millions setting up a network of lobby groups and think tanks to create doubt and denial about climate change. It was an effort designed to attack and dispute the very kind of science they themselves had been doing. And it worked. Politicians went to bat for fossil fuels, and these massive corporations kept digging and mining, drilling and fracking like there was no tomorrow. America became the biggest producer and consumer of oil in the world. Fossil fuel companies made hundreds of billions, while the public paid the lion's share to clean up their disasters. We lost a generation of time we'll never get back. Entire species will never get back. Natural wonders gone forever. And in 2017, Hurricane Maria destroyed the place where my family was from, Puerto Rico. It was like a climate bomb. It took as many American lives as 9/11. And in the next year, When I was elected to Congress, the world's leading climate scientists declared another emergency. They told us that we had 12 years left to cut our emissions in half, or hundreds of millions of people would be more likely to face food and water shortages, poverty, and death. 12 years to change everything. How we got around, how we fed ourselves, how we made our stuff, how we lived and worked, everything. The only way to do it was to transform our economy, which we already knew was broken, since the vast majority of wealth was going to just a small handful of people, and most folks were falling further and further behind. It was a true turning point. Lots of people gave up. They said we were doomed. But some of us remembered that as a nation, we'd been in peril before. The Great Depression, World War II. We knew from our history how to pull together to overcome impossible odds. And at the very least, we owed it to our children to try. The wave began when Democrats took back the House in 2018, and then the Senate and the White House in 2020, and launched the decade of the Green New Deal, a flurry of legislation that kicked off our social and ecological transformation to save the planet. It was the kind of swing-for-the-fence ambition we needed. Finally, we were entertaining solutions on the scale of the crises we faced without leaving anyone behind. That included Medicare for All, the most popular social program in American history. We also introduced the federal jobs guarantee, a public option including dignified living wages for work. Funnily enough, the biggest problem in those early years was a labor shortage. We were building a national smart grid, retrofitting every building in America, putting trains like this one all across the country. We needed more workers. That group of kids from my neighborhood were right in the middle of it all, especially this one girl, Ileana. Her first job out of college was with AmeriCorps Climate, restoring wetlands and bayous in coastal Louisiana. Most of her friends were in her union, including some oil workers in transition. They took apart old pipelines and got to work planting mangroves with the same salary and benefits. Of course, when it came to healing the land, we had huge gaps in our knowledge. Luckily, indigenous communities offered generational expertise to help guide the way. Ileana got restless, tried her hand as a solar plant engineer for a while, but eventually made her career in raising the next generation as part of the Universal Child Care Initiative. As it turns out, caring for others is valuable, low-carbon work, and we started paying real money to folks like teachers, domestic workers, and home health aides. Those were years of massive change, and not all of it was good. When Hurricane Sheldon hit southern Florida, parts of Miami went underwater for the last time. But as we battled the floods, fires, and droughts, we knew how lucky we were to have started acting when we did. And we didn't just change the infrastructure, we changed how we did things. We became a society that was not only modern and wealthy, but dignified and humane too. By committing to universal rights like healthcare and meaningful work for all, we stopped being so scared of the future. We stopped being scared of each other, and we found our shared purpose. Ileana heard the call too, and in 2028 she ran for office in the first cycle of publicly funded election campaigns. And now she occupies the seat that I once held. I couldn't be more proud of her, a true child of the Green New Deal. When I think back to my first term in Congress, riding that old school Amtrak in 2019, all of this was still ahead of us. And the first big step was just closing our eyes and imagining it. We can be whatever we have the courage to see.
Isn't that so great? It's inspiring. She doesn't say where she ends up after her seat in Congress is taken by the young alien, but I have my own ideas. Absolutely terrific, right? And it hits on, I think, all the right notes. So if we can bring up the video of the
global players for their economic and environmental
I'm going to sit down, someone else.
Her new book, On Fire, The Burning...
Oh, wow. Okay. So I'm just going to pick at a piece of that, okay? And I'm going to do it in a way that connects where I think MMT is helpful in this conversation. So when I spoke to you last time, a couple of days ago, and I said, people sometimes say to me, how will you know when you've won? Do you remember what I said? Yeah, when we stop asking, how are you going to pay for it, and we start asking, how are you going to resource it? So I'm going to start off. Is this a familiar creature over here? Do you have these? Beavers? Funny. So how funny is that? So I'm using this little guy that you don't even have. But this little beaver, they're all over in the U.S., right? And the guy is lucky, right? Because what do beavers build? They build dams. Say, this little beaver needs to build a dam, and so the big problem for the beaver is, I got to find some stuff to build myself a dam. And the reason he's so lucky is because he doesn't have to worry about how to pay for it. He doesn't have to go to the riverbank, get it? Get it? For a loan and sit down and ask for the money to finance the construction. He just gets to work building the dam. He fells a tree, he breaks it into pieces, and he builds himself a safe and secure environment, right? That's what he gets to do. So he's the architect, he pulls the permits, he's the engineer, he's the construction worker, he does it all, right? So that is a very good thing. And what AOC says in the video is, you can't be what you can't see. So she knows that in order to get people behind this idea of a Green New Deal, they have to think that it's possible, have to be able to see the world as it could be, in spite of all of the fear and this narrative that the other side, the opposition, is going to build. You have to help people see clearly through the fog that there is a way to get where we are trying to go. You can't be what you can't see, she says. Imagine the future as it could be, right? A just future. It's inclusive. It's an opportunity to deal with other challenges, inequality, and so forth. You heard it. She says, we have to act boldly. When the video came out, the scientific community, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, said 12 years, right? Well, 2 years have essentially passed. And we, at least in the US, have another year before we put a new president into the White House. And so best case scenario, we're looking at maybe 10 years left on the clock, okay? So we have 10 years to change everything. And a single country can't do it. This has to be a global effort. And when I say we have 10 years to change everything, I mean including how we think about money and taxes, deficits, debt, inflation, all of that. All of that has to change, I believe, to get where we ultimately have to go. Because the way that they plan to beat us is, well, multifaceted, right? They're going to attack from all angles. But one big way is on the sheer magnitude of the price tag. How are you going to pay for it? Right? That's what they're going to do. So when she says, we knew we had to save the planet and we had the technology to do it, but people were scared. They're going to play into the fear. They said it was too big and not practical. They set up networks of lobbyists and think tanks to tell the public again and again, this is impossible, this can't happen, we can't afford it. They bring in the economists, right? To help make the case. I debated this guy not too long ago at Columbia University. His name is Douglas Holtz-Eakin. He is the former director of the Congressional Budget Office, the gatekeeper, the scorekeeper in Washington. Any piece of legislation, major legislation that wants to go through, has to get past CBO. You better get a permission slip out of the CBO or you ain't doing nothing. He was the gatekeeper, okay? He goes on Fox News, you know it well, and he says, it would cost $93 trillion to do this Green New Deal. $93 trillion. We have economists like Larry Summers there on the bottom, former Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton, former economic advisor under President Barack Obama. What does he say? It's not a realistic calculus. Not realistic. What does the guy in the middle say? Former professor, blogger, kind of a big name, sort of on the left. It would spend the U.S. into oblivion. Well, okay. Guys from the Heritage Institute up top saying it would be fiscally catastrophic. The press the press, the press. Every time a candidate wants to do anything, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? Where are you going to get this $93 trillion? So I keep saying, not only can we not be what we can't see, but we can't have what we can't afford. So somebody better be able to come in with a compelling narrative about how to actually deal with the financing. And that is where I think MMT is useful to people like AOC and others. And we're working with folks on the Hill to try to help shift that narrative away from the focus on the budget outcomes and the financing to what really matters. Because this is from the Twitter feed of the Republican Party. These are the Senate Republicans saying the Green New Deal is unaffordable, right? Just telling people, can't afford it. This is U.S. Senator from the state of Iowa, a Republican. At $93 trillion, the Green New Deal would cost more than the entire recorded spending of the United States since the Constitution went into effect. You see, the public can be told, imagine this, you can't do this. Are you kidding? So here is where I say MMT is helpful, because we can deal with the pay-for question quite easily. We understand the mechanics of government finance, how the budget works, how financing works, the purpose of taxes, borrowing, the debt. We can put these things in a different framework and make them less scary, okay? Better understood. Governments don't budget like households. To pay for this stuff, Congress just has to pass the legislation, and the deal is done. The Fed will clear every payment that is authorized by Congress. The central bank here will clear any payment authorized by your government, by Parliament. What matters isn't the absolute price tag, the size of the price tag, but the economy's capacity to safely absorb any new spending that has been authorized. So when she says, we've been here before, and she harkens back to the New Deal or World War II, that's exactly what we're talking about. We have been here before. We've managed resources and mass mobilization, and we talked about this a little bit in the Q&A that I did on the first day of this conference, and so some of this is repetition. And this is what I said back in 2018. This was me saying the right way to budget for a Green New Deal is the way Keynes approached the question in his How to Pay for the War. National resource planning. It wasn't about where to get the money. It was about how to manage the transition then to a war economy, now to a clean, sustainable economy. Okay, and so I put a little picture up there. This is what Keynes understood, right? War planning was about ensuring sufficient access to Britain's real resources, not its financial resources, not where to get the money to pay for the war, but how to manage the inflation risk as all that money got spent, right? It was about transforming the economy away from one oriented around producing for consumers toward one oriented around producing for the war effort. And like AOC, Keynes cared about doing it in a just and fair way. He actually was concerned about that. I mentioned this last time, that the U.S. was paying attention, because a question came up about whether you could, take what Keynes did and apply it in other countries, in other contexts. And I said, sure. The U.S. Treasury was following very carefully, and there were internal memos. This is one of those internal memos. Comes from the United States Treasury. You can see a review of the book How to Pay for the War by John Maynard Keynes. The Keynes plan of war finance has attracted widespread attention throughout England and would probably be strongly urged upon the U.S. Treasury if the U.S. should become involved in the war. The outstanding merits claimed by Mr. Keynes for his plan are, one, it would avoid inflation, right? Not it would find all the money to pay, it would avoid inflation, and two, it would place the war bonds in the hands of the people who were making the greatest sacrifice. In other words, not the financiers, not the 1%, right? In the hands of the people who are making the greatest sacrifice. By discouraging consumption in the present and asking people to sacrifice and delay consumption until after the war, they could hold war bonds that would pay interest, allowing them to have greater income with which to consume when the war was over. So that's how Keynes was thinking about this. Since then, two of my colleagues, Levy Institute scholars and MMT economists, went on to write exactly the paper, How to Pay for the Green New Deal, taking Keynes's model and applying it to the present day. So this is a nice, big, beefy piece that's written by Yeva and Randy, laying out the answers to the questions. You know, how should we go about thinking of this? And so I mentioned this last time that the U.S. government went from spending, you know, like 12% of total GDP to, you know, 45, 50% in a very short period of time. Ramped up massive increase in government spending. The UK inflation, UK obviously involved before the US got into the war. You can see inflation went up. You got double-digit inflation. It isn't as if you kept inflation at 2%, but it was managed, and it wasn't persistent year after year. You got a couple of years of very high inflation, and then it begins to come down. And as Professor Harcourt brought up, in the Q&A period, there were wage and price controls. People did things, right? Economists advised and policymakers understood that there were other tools available to manage inflationary pressures. And so the US did these things, and we got through this, right? We won. And we didn't let inflation get out of control, and real resources were mobilized, and we can do this again, right? We've been here, as she says. So how would we do this today? Figure out what the resources are that you need for this Green New Deal. How ambitious do you want to be? On what time scale? What resources are going to be necessary to pull this thing off? What do you currently have available to you? And where do you get the rest? That's it, right? I mean, those are the big three questions. So assessing resource needs, well, it depends what you're calling a Green New Deal. And there are a lot of different plans, some more ambitious than others. Right? A lot of different people have said we could have a Green New Deal for about 2.5% of GDP. Others say no, it should be bigger, you know, upwards of 5 or more % of GDP. Figure out how big do you want to go? What do you need? And then where are you going to find the resources? How do you figure out how much slack there is in the economy? How much extra capacity is available? You look at stuff like this. Right? You find measures of slack capacity utilization. We used to run, I'm going backwards. This is the unemployment rate. Okay, so that's an indication of slack. Official measures of unemployment, broader measures for us use 6. You know, how many people are available to help us do this? How much slack is there in industry, right? Capacity utilization rates. There was a time when we used to run the economy, full capacity of factories and so forth, close to 90%. We don't do that anymore. Now we're down around 75% normally. So there is additional capacity unused in factories. That means if you want to, you know, place an order for Caterpillar for a bunch of bulldozers and cranes, and you want to get to work building high-speed rail or something, there's probably some good capacity available, right, to ramp up production and produce more of the things we need to build clean modes of transportation. How can you free up capacity? Well, you heard her say Medicare for all. In our case, we don't have it, right? And so we have a system that is built largely around private health insurance, and it's about 18% of US GDP. We're going to 20% here in the next couple of years. That's the best guess. 1 in every $5 spent in the US economy spent on healthcare, right? That's a lot of real resources. Think about the private health insurance industry, right? The giant shiny buildings that you drive by with all the people inside, the bill collectors, the people who process paperwork, who tell you what's covered and what's not covered and why they're not going to, you know, let you approve this test and that test. All those people go away. Virtually, right? That's huge. You take 18%, 20% of the US economy and shrink it down, even if you just go to 15%, right? That's nothing like what the rest of the world does. But even if you just shave off a few percentage points, you're freeing up enormous real resources, people that can be used to produce other things, right? They can be part of the Green New Deal. So you can get resources that way. Wall Street. Senator Sanders has, for many years, talked about shrinking the size of Wall Street, the financial industry. Again, behemoths. Just think of them. You know who they are. Goldman Sachs, Citi, Morgan, right? You got a lot of people. You downsize Wall Street, you free up a lot of real resources that can be mobilized for other uses. The military-industrial complex. People say, we can cut defense in order to pay for the Green New Deal. Well, it's not that you need the money out of the budget, it's that you need the real capacity. Okay, so there's a lot to be had there. Criminal justice reform. We've got 2.1 million people locked up behind bars in the US. Senator Sanders says he would like to see that number reduced by half by the end of his first term. That gives you 1 million people to do stuff, right? So this is what I'm talking about. We talk about real resources. This is a report that I co-authored with Randy and Pavlina, other MMT economists, Scott Fullwiler and Flavia Dantes. We all did this together. This is our sort of path to full employment, where we talk about the role of a job guarantee in the broader economy, not in the context of a Green New Deal, but just what kinds of green jobs, caring for community, caring for planet, caring for people, what types of jobs could be performed as part of just contributing to the creation of a cleaner, more sustainable future. So if you're interested, you can take a look at that. Bottom line is that you have to manage inflation risk. It's not about finding dollars to pay for dollar spending, right? It's about saying, if I do this additional spending in an economy that is depressed, like the sink on the left, then I've got a lot of room to spend safely. But as my economy gets closer and closer to full employment, any additional spending, not just government spending, carries a heightened inflation risk. And at some point, there are real capacity constraints. So it's just about figuring out, like they did in the 40s and the 50s, how to manage the real resource use through the transition. Okay, so in MMT, we reject the pay-go idea that for every dollar you want to put in, you have to rip a dollar out of the economy, fully offset all new spending. That's not a good way to approach the Green New Deal or any other government program. We think of taxes not as financial pay-fors, but as inflation offsets. Right? The purpose of raising the tax is to remove spending power from someone. Why? Because you don't want them layering on their own demand on top of the demand that you're placing on real resources. It's about mitigating inflation risk. Choosing the offsets carefully matters. You pick the wrong offsets, the wrong tax, you're going to do little to offset inflationary pressure, even though maybe it won't add to the deficit. So what we need is more research oriented at answering this question, right? How much capacity is there? And there are some Italian economists who published a paper through INET that I think did very good work, 3 economists, trying to get a sense of the output gap. You know, how much slack is there really? Better measures, because it's not enough to rely on the unemployment rate as a guide, as we've seen, right? We can keep pushing the unemployment rate down without triggering inflation. So we need better guideposts, better, dashboard indicators, right? To help set off signs that inflationary pressures might be building in parts of the economy. So one of the studies that I like very much that was done not too long ago, I think I mentioned, says that in the US economy today, there's between $500 and $600 billion of non-inflationary fiscal space, right? So that the US government could increase the fiscal deficit by something like 500 or 600 billion before offsets are needed without inflationary pressure. That's a lot of space. If you can get $500 billion of a Green New Deal annually out of the economy before you have to start increasing taxes, that's a lot of space. But we need more work like that, okay? So if there's, this paper said 530, if there's 530 billion available, and in Randy's paper, he says you free up another 200 billion by moving to Medicare for all, frees up another 200 billion in fiscal space, and you end fossil fuel subsidies, that frees up another 650 billion. Well, I just found $1.38 trillion, and I'm just warming up, you see? So the point is that we can do this, right? We just have to ask the right questions, and in asking the right questions, I think it will guide us in the right direction in terms of how to carry this stuff out. So I'm probably out of time. I'm certainly out of energy. Oh, all right, I want to say this. Sometimes people say, well, we have to invent new banks. We need an investment bank. We need some kind of a new public investment bank to finance this endeavor. No, you don't. You have a public bank. It's called the Fed in our case. It's called the Australian Central Bank in your case. We have we have the bank we need, right? The bank will clear the payments that have been authorized. You don't need to reinvent the wheel in order to do stuff. The shortest distance between 2 points, if you're on a plane, is a straight line, okay? And we ought to take the straight line route because the time clock is ticking. We have 10 years. Let's not piddle around and trying to have fights about creating new banks and new ways to finance this. We have everything we need. We need legislation, and then the central bank will clear the payments. Okay, that's what we need. Last thing, and then I'm all done, is this. How did this come up earlier today? This piece in The Guardian, did anybody see it? Did you talk about it? Oh, well, this was, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was encouraging from my vantage point. There was no, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, believe, go ahead. I read it as encouraging because there's no conversation in here about how much it's going to cost. No conversation about the impact on the deficit or the need to keep budgets in balance through this process. It is simply a statement from a former prime minister focused on the urgent need to address the problem on the scale that it merits and plan, plan, plan. The word planning, I've highlighted it, right? Everywhere we need a plan. We need to plan. And resources. You can see he talks about the real resources, the firefighters that are needed, the real resources, and planning, planning, planning. Because if it's not well planned, then you're going to get potentially consequences you don't want, mostly inflationary, right? They're going to be, people are not going to have the jobs through the transition, you're going to have an inflation problem and all the rest. So anyway, I took that as a good sign. Thank you. Do you want me to stay? All right.
Please sit down, Stephanie. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, well now is your chance to ask a few questions to Stephanie Kelton. And I'll just give this microphone.
It's hot in here.
Okay, I think Jeffrey must have the first question.
Is that on? Am I on? Yeah. Thank you very much again for a very clear and inspiring talk. Could I just add one point which goes back to the 1940s when F.C. Doma pointed out that if you are in a growing economy and not a static one, then the debt-to-income ratio won't expand without a limit. It can approach a livable with limit, and you can have a deficit every year, whereas you couldn't do that if you fall for the fallacy of using a static economy that doesn't change as your basic model. And I've always thought that was such a sensible proposition and adds very much to what modern monetary theory and what post-Keynesian theory has to say.
Thanks, Jeff. Do you want to?
Well, I'm going to address some of that in the Harcourt lecture, but I know the model and I take your point.
Okay. Now, is there any woman that wants to ask the next question? No, I'll tell you what, in that case...
Come on, ladies.
Yeah, come on, ladies. And then the one after that is Alex, who is Gabby's partner, and I think since Gabby doesn't have a question, in place of Gabby, Alex can ask the next one.
Hi, Stephanie.
Okay.
You trashed.
You just said we can, like in America, you plan to free up a lot of private resources to create room for more government spending. Do you see the like there must be a lot of reluctance for private sector to do that. And should we trust the government to give them that much ability to spend on our behalf?
Well, look, you're going to have to rely on organized planning. And I don't think that it's going to be just government public officials who are involved in these conversations. It wasn't then. You're going to have vested interest. You're going to have labor at the table, I certainly hope, right? You're going to have public officials. You're going to have private industry. You're going to, but in terms of the example I used with Medicare for All, they don't want to volunteer to free up resources to help us transition to a Green New Deal. Everybody, the vested interests are going to be just that, vested in their interests. But we've got to get there, right? We've got to get there. You're going to free up a lot just in the transition away from coal.
Okay, next Alex, and next the woman third from the front.
Hi. Okay, so I've been sitting here trying to do the maths in my head because people will keep coming back to 93 trillion. It's a massive number. Those of us in this room know it's not real money, but in a sense, but it still represents someone's estimate of what sort of resources need to go into this. So hypothetically, if we spend half of it on raw materials and tools, half of it to pay people's wages, that's 10 years pay for 50 million Americans. I'm just trying to imagine what it looks like if 1 in 6 Americans stop whatever they're doing right now and get to work on the Green New Deal.
Okay.
Are you really thinking on that scale? Is it this big?
No, it's not that big. That's the number that was conjured up by a right-wing opponent to provide the maximum impact, 93 trillion. Senator Sanders, I mentioned the other day, has by far and away the most ambitious Green New Deal proposal out there. It is transformative. It includes a Medicare for All. It includes a job guarantee. It's all of it, and it's $16.3 trillion. So we're not talking about, that was just pulled out of, you know where.
And the woman over here, thank you.
Thank you, you're great. Really great. Michael Hudson says that 30 to 40% of our resources, work and emissions are related to paying interest, which is embedded in everything we do. How are we going to control the Goldman Sachses and the Morgan Stanleys and the cities? I thought Corbyn had some good plans. What's Sanders got to say? Because I just think it gives us enormous wiggle room. Apart from the 30-40% that the private banks take, we've also got rentier capitalism and war and waste. I mean, really, there's just masses of room for improvement, or less work or less resource use. I think it's very positive if we can get a good government.
Yeah, so I like Michael Hudson, and to that point, you know, Senator Sanders has a plan for that too, and it's called postal banking. So you can have a public option in the loan industry, in the banking industry, and you can do that and deal in important ways with this question of rentier extracting interest. You can also address the public debt piece of that, because in the MMT framework, Scott Fulweiler and Bill Mitchell and I and others have shown that there's a way to accomplish the financing without the issuance of public debt. In other words, the bond sale is an ex post optional piece of this thing. So to the extent that you're trying to manage real resources, maybe you don't want to layer on an additional payment in the form of interest to bondholders that then allows someone to tap additional real resources at a time when you're trying to curtail the use of real resources and mobilize and manage inflation. Maybe you say dispensing with bond sales is part of the plan to manage inflation risk going forward.
Thanks. Cengiz, is it Cengiz? Yeah, sorry, you're so far away, I can barely recognise you. So Cengiz, and then if there is a woman question, we'll have a woman question. And then if we can get the microphone to the gentleman right at the back in the corner, he's had his hand up for ages. So Cengiz first.
Hi, Stephanie. I just wanted to ask a question about the job guarantee. So how is it different from a job in the regular public service or private sector? And MMT refers to it as a macroeconomic stabiliser. So how does it act as an inflation anchor? Why isn't it inflationary?
Okay, so making sure that I've got all the pieces of the question. How is the job guarantee, first you said different from a private sector job? Oh, from other public sector work? Well, so I'm a public sector worker, but I'm not in the job guarantee. And if we introduced a federal job guarantee, I would remain a public sector worker who's not in the job guarantee program, but there would be some people who enter the job guarantee program. Maybe they came out of public sector employment. Maybe they were working for local government in the state of Kansas. And the governor came along and slashed taxes, decimated the budget. By the way, I lived in Kansas and this happened. And I got laid off, right? So I'm no longer a public sector employee, but I could transition into public service employment in a federal job guarantee program. Maybe I lose a job in the private sector. I'm a retail worker, and my hours get cut, and then pretty soon I don't have any hours and I'm laid off, and I transition into that. So you're going to have a mix of public sector workers, displaced public sector workers, displaced private sector workers, both of whom could end up temporarily in the public service program. What was the other part of the question? Why is it a better price anchor? Well, I think I sort of did this maybe the other day, but maybe I didn't do a very good job. Because right now, it's an automatic stabilizer. It buffers the downturn. So if you transition instead of becoming unemployed when the economy turns down, you remain employed through the business cycle, which means you remain employable, right? So as the economy begins to pick up again and businesses start hiring, they're more comfortable reaching into the buffer stock of employed workers and hiring out of that pool at a small premium to get a worker out of that pool, as opposed to pilfering workers from their competitor because they don't want to hire people who've been out of work for a long time, and they bid up wages more aggressively to get workers.
Okay, Jane?
It's sort of along the same lines as Jankis's question. So I just wanted to see if you could explain how a tiered wage system in a job guarantee program, a federally funded job guarantee program, doesn't serve its price stability function, and if that was to be adopted, how it would sort of undermine any spending that we would be needing to do in terms of tackling climate change. So there's been some discussion around.
Well, I wasn't here for that.
Just
so yeah, I'm a little reluctant to try to weigh in too heavily on that because first, I wasn't there. Second, my own research hasn't looked at that.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Okay, the gentleman at the back. Thank you.
Yeah, hello Stephanie, welcome to Australia.
Thank you.
My name's Andrew. I wanted to just follow up on this question of the availability of real resources, going beyond the question of money. If we had a need for a big program of, for example, building renewable energy in 10 years, would it be a natural part of that program to simply build the productive resources that we needed as part of the program? Build the factories we needed at whatever, if we don't have it?
Yes, sure.
Simple question.
Yeah, so figure out the resources you need, figure out the resources you have, and then figure out where you're going to get the rest. And in part 3, investing and creating those resources.
That's right. And I'm anticipating people saying, well, we don't actually have enough factories to do that. But you'd naturally build them, would you not, before you started trying to punch out a whole lot of other stuff?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, I think we're going to have just a couple more questions because Stephanie has been working very hard and I think we've worked her more than hard enough. So this gentleman here has had, again, he's had his hand up. I'm sorry, Paul. Paul is doing his marathon run a bit now. He's coming into the final straight. Paul is approaching, and yes! And then we'll look for a woman to have the final question.
Well done, Paul. And thank you, Stephanie. It was really enjoyable listening to you this afternoon and on Friday. You said that MMT can be useful in answering the questions regarding resources or paying for it, as they will say, easily. Now, you're going to have, or what should you say, AOC is going to have a lot of opposition attacks, and there's going to be a lot of fear tactics used, and fear tactics work when people aren't educated in the details. So, first of all, do you agree with that? And secondly, if you do, how will you educate the people during a scare campaign and with alarmist media headlines?
Well, do I agree? I'm sure I agree on at least some level with that statement. How much detail people require? I mean, I sort of look at the recent election in the UK, and I kind of feel like maybe the Labour Party went too far trying to give too many details, and it didn't work. So, but I don't think you can go the other extreme and just say, just trust us either. No details. Somewhere in the middle of all of that is probably the right balance. I wouldn't know where to draw the line, but information overload, too much detail. The more what I've learned in getting involved with people who are running for president and so forth is that the more detail you provide, the more details there are to pick apart. Sometimes less is more. You roll out a very detailed pay-for thing, and I'm going to do this, and what happens? It's not going to raise the revenue they say it's going to raise, they won't do this, and everyone focuses on the details, and then we forget to argue the morale, we forget the message. What is the policy really about? So the fight gets corrupted. So yes, you have to address, they're going to go on television and they're going to say you have to give up your hamburger, you have to give up your straw, you have to give up your weekend, right? All of those things, and you've got to have a response to that, or they will win with that negative messaging. So I don't know where in the middle the right answer lies, but I think you can get in trouble with too many details.
Right, the woman, you were standing right next to a woman at the back, Tori.
Oh.
Sorry. I sort of pointed. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Come and ask Stephanie a question before.
Stephanie, it was mentioned in Phil's talk yesterday about how much of our informal economy is taken up by those household carer tasks, such as parenting, caring for disabled people, etc. Does your model of the Green New Deal and the job guarantee look at those traditionally women's roles of childcare, caring for family members, disabled people, etc.? Does that fit into job guarantee positions possibly, and as a way to balance a gender pay gap?
As I have always understood the job guarantee through the work of people like Pavlina Chernova, through Flavia Dantes, through Randy Ray, the American contingent, I'll confine my remarks, who have been working on job guarantee for some 20 years or more, that has always been a piece of it. Because Pavlina has said we need to build a care economy, use the job guarantee, and that the work itself should be oriented broadly around the creation and fostering of a care economy. And it means caring for people, caring for the planet, caring for communities, caring for others. Right? I can hire Stephen to go sit in the elder care facility and hold my mother's hand. She's not in elder care, but if she were, and I lived very far away, and I either have to give up my job and move from New York to California to be with her and make those sacrifices, or I can live in a society where I know that someone is going to be there every day to read her story, play a game of checkers with her, hold her hand, talk to her, and I feel that she's not isolated and alone and that she's well cared for. So if she lives in my hometown and I want to be there and take care of her during those months or years, instead of paying a stranger to do that, you could compensate me as I step out of the labor force and do home care work. And I'm comfortable with that. It sounds perfectly reasonable to me.
Okay, now I hope you're going to let me, after this, thank some other people too, but I just wanted to say, I was walking over to pick Stephanie up just now, and I was thinking about you lot back here and how much you wanted her to speak to you, but I was very reluctant to ask her to come over and do so. And she insisted on coming and speaking to you and not disappointing you. The other thing I want to say, I'm still going to Bikram yoga. I'm trying to live long enough to see somebody like Bernie Sanders elected to a position of power in the US. Something like a Green New Deal, you can call it a green transition if you like, arose by any other name, as far as I'm concerned, in both the US and Australia and internationally. And I also, I want to live long enough to see Treasury Secretary Stephanie Kelton in the job that she'll be doing.
Wait.
So thank you.
My new thing is U.S. Ambassador to Australia. That's the title I'm going for.
So thanks to Stephanie, but I have other people to thank as well before I hand over to Paul to close up. First and foremost, again I want to thank Jeffrey for being with us across these 3 days. Second and foremost, I want to thank, and I'm not sort of doing this collectively, I would like to do it, I'm a bit too tired and it would take too long to do it at the moment, but I'd like to thank every single one of you for your participation in this event. Really, it's been absolutely fantastic, and it's you that's made it fantastic. As Stephanie said, you stayed right to the end. It's been absolutely amazing. Give yourself a round of applause. Thirdly, I'm not going to thank all the volunteers by name. Not all of their names are in the brochure, which please take away with you as a souvenir. Please don't take the lanyards, remember? It cost me a fortune if you all take the lanyards away with you. But I'd like to thank all the volunteers. I'd like to thank Phil for all the work he's put in on this conference. I would like to thank, because a lot of our speakers are here because of him, and actually some of the other things Stephanie's doing across the week are in part because of his work. I'd like to thank Lachlan McCall by name, wherever he is. I'd like to thank Ed Miller for his help as well. I'd like to thank Paul, who's going to just say goodbye in a moment, so don't run away, because Paul started it and Paul's going to finish it. And where is she? Please come round here. Now, she'd hate me for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. If Get Up ever are stupid enough to fire Gabby, there's dozens of us that would find some way of hiring her. She is the queen of organising. I've put in months on this, but Gabby has put in 5 times as much time as me. And guess how much I've paid her for that? Do you know? Have a guess. Nothing at all. She has done this out of commitment. That's right. Yeah, sorry. Again, I'm losing.
Thank you so much. Isn't this guy amazing? Thank you, Stephen. Yay!
I'm sorry if I forgot to thank anyone. I'm going to rely on Paul to fill in and finish off. Thank you, Paul.
Well, there's only one other person to thank, really, apart from yourself, and that's Stephen. Who And I just have to say again, Stephen and Gabby are the most dynamic team, and they're a pair of legends, really. And apart from that, just a thanks to everyone else, the speakers, thanks to yourselves. Give yourselves another round of applause, because you've been fabulous. It's been a fabulous few days, stimulating, challenging, patchy on occasions, up, down, interesting, fascinating, exciting this afternoon even. Please be kind to yourselves. and those near to you. Please think about those who are going through challenging times at the moment. Extend them whatever support, whatever love, whatever affection you can. And one practical thing to wrap up. We want to, out of this, to establish a just green new transition deal or something or other working group. I know there have been various names. We're going to call it a Just Transition Action Group because we want to actually get on and do stuff, and that's one of the things, I guess, in Get Up in particular, but other people involved, we like to do things. Well, I mean, we need to sit and plan, and planning is critical, and resourcing, but we actually like to act. So if you're from Adelaide, you want to do some more in this space, please put your name down on the sign-up sheet, which is out the front on the registration desk. We'll contact you about a meeting that's coming up on Sunday, 2nd of February, from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. at the Joinery. Do you all know, Adelaide residents, where the Joinery is? 111 Franklin Street, where the old bus station used to be. And we want to start a Just Transition working group that will be supported by Get Up's campaign, or supported by Get Up and be a campaigning group. And we want to put on lots of events, actions and other things. So please join us, put your name down. Thank you again, we love you all.
And I'm terribly sorry, I forgot. Could you thank Ella and Coco for me? They've been a great.
Stephanie, who was going to go over?